So we got quite an interesting topic here today, and I think you'll find it really interesting. I've been sitting with this for a couple days now, and this is actually the second take because a lot had come through this morning pertaining to emotions and this subtle avoidance of feeling them through expression. Or what I'm going to say is not actually the expression of the emotion, but the expression of what we think is the emotion, which is actually disguised insecurity and reactivity. We'll really start to kind of open this. And by the end, I hope you can resonate with some of the things I said here. And so originally it was going to be free flow, but I'm going to kind of read a lot of this actually this time. But going forward, we'll probably do less of this and a little more just conversating to the camera here. Um, but yeah, so what we're talking about today, as I alluded to and kind of already said, is on feeling our emotions and the subtle avoidance of them that comes in expression. But we're also, of course, going to talk about suppression as well, because if we're going to talk about expression, we're going to have to talk about its opposite, really, because to get the full picture here. So I find there's some really subtle nuances that arise around the emotional experience in general in our relationship to it. So if you think about expression and suppression, I think you can tell there's a choice there. You know, if one is going left and one is going right, it's implying that when we meet this feeling, we can choose to express it or suppress it, or we can feel it. And sometimes we start to feel it and we go either of those directions. The one thing that I think is unique to expression, which is why I wanted to talk about it specifically, is because I I see expression as something that can actually accompany the full feeling of an emotion, whereas suppression is always not. And the unique thing that I'm going to talk about within the expression choice is that sometimes we can express something as a way to avoid feeling it, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. And I don't really see it talked about a lot. And it's something I've been sitting with a lot myself. So the other thing is repression of emotions, which I'm not going to really get into much, but that's because I'm talking mainly about conscious things here, but that would be the unconscious block of like unwanted thoughts or feelings or impulses. And suppression is voluntary as well. It's by definition, it's when we deliberately try to forget or not think about painful or unwanted thoughts. So where we often find ourselves going to the insecure expression or suppression of emotions is when we have a model that's being challenged, or the energetic signature is what I'm calling it, of an unintegrated experience that is being brought forth. And then we react to that by whatever means. Either we close down our hearts or our fields, or we close down our bodies, or maybe we laugh when we really, a lot of people will laugh awkwardly because, they're uncomfortable around what the person's saying, or they don't know how to respond. And actually, that's a way to kind of people please, which maybe we'll get into in another video. I have a lot of experience with that myself. But yeah, whatever it is, there's some reaction there. So I'm going to start to argue that it's better to express than suppress. You'll constantly see me kind of bounce back between sides, and I'm doing this with really all topics because I think it's really important that we can hold the paradox. We can hold the good and the bad as we simultaneously talk about what is this common essence this common ground that is rising up into these polarities that then become these more and more and more polarities that, you can see where that goes. So in terms of why I would say it's better to express than repress, is really due to the fact that at least when you're expressing something, it's not like piling up. However, expressing can be just as detrimental, because even though we would think, oh, we're just letting out, we're letting it out, the difference is we might be letting it out, and we actually never have any energy for ourselves. We eventually burn out. We just totally burn out because, one, we're not in integrity with ourselves, because our constant expression is actually a way of abandoning and lying to ourselves, because we're not actually authentically expressing it. And that's the key difference here. Is the expression authentic, or is it a way to avoid the truth, avoid the reality, avoid the feeling? So it depends on how that expressing is done, really. So where the suppression weighs us down because we can't let go, the expression, the overexpression, drains us because we can never find any energy for ourselves, because we constantly give away more than we have, and we're just leaking it out. It's like we're a cup with holes in it. We just keep pouring. It's just coming out. It's coming out. It's coming out. And we cannot imply as well with expression that there's integration happening, and we're going to get into that more, because the integration part is really important. And ultimately, integration leads to understanding. So when we talk about expressing emotions, we can say that usually when doing so, it's because we have and or are feeling the emotion, but this does not mean that the feeling has to find expression. And what I find is that there seems to be this assumption that if I don't express the emotion, that it automatically means I must be suppressing it. Not true. And this is the big topic, really. This is the overarching topic, which is the opposite of expression, not the opposite, sorry, the meeting of expression and repression, and what I think is the most healthy start, or really the only way maybe to feel an emotion, which is to hold it. Now, when I say hold, I don't mean shove down. I actually mean allow it, and it's more like it's moving through you, but it's also giving you energy. Unlike the cup with holes in it, it's more of a giving and receiving that's happening from both ends. And so, yeah, let me be clear that I don't want to get into wrong or right here, and there's nothing wrong or right about expressing or even suppressing emotions. And really, this is not a conversation about right and wrong. In fact, I think doing either of those things, suppressing or expressing, it's essentially a survival process that began from childhood. It's a way for us to reorganize our systems in order to handle things that we can't feel, we can't integrate at the moment of time. And if we just were feeling all these things, especially in today's world where we have way more energy, way more technology, really is what I mean by that, way more stimuli, if we didn't have a way to store and just leak, I mean, we'd probably just be dead already very quickly. I mean, that's just how it seems it would be like to me. So it does serve a purpose for it at some point. Releasing or storing energy we can't hold is useful. Else we may explode or collapse, or both. So the issue arises when we don't return to the feeling at a later time, and or when life keeps giving us people and circumstances, situations that bring that feeling up again and again, and we keep choosing to not feel it. That's where we run into trouble. And like, what am I really saying then? Simply put, there's consequences for these things, and whether you want to perceive them as good or bad, again, this isn't a right or wrong discussion. So that's ultimately up for the individual to decide. I'm not going to get into morality in this video here, but learning to be with our feelings without this need to do something about it is really what I'm saying, just is another step to something more valuable to us. And that is the integration of the experience and not just the release of it, which is what the expressing can sometimes play this. It's kind of like putting on a mask. Like, it seems like we're expressing it. That means we're feeling it, but it's not always true. So when we integrate the experience, we get an understanding, and this is when we learn, grow, and evolve from the experience. Rather than just release the energy, we grow our capacity to hold life in all its joy. Other ways, we avoid feelings are our emotions. It's not just repression and suppression, but you could, I guess, categorize any of these things into one of those, which is the sex, drugs, and alcohol, or sometimes food, even playing music, even healthy things can be a way that we avoid emotions. And actually, one of the things that brought up this topic for me was I've been really trying to understand my relationship to food, because I'm finding like I emotionally eat a lot. Sometimes it's really overbearing for me because intense stuff is coming up, and I'm not finding this capacity to hold those things. And my way of kind of, I guess you could say, suppressing them is shoving things down. Quite literally, I'm suppressing it. I'm eating it. I'm eating my emotions, eating the feeling. And yeah, and that's just to share like that I'm human, and I'm not talking on any of this stuff as if I've figured it out and I'm there and I'm here to teach you. That, like, I'm here to get real and try to be as honest and vulnerable in sharing my experience as I can. Because when I talk about the medicine within, that medicine, a big part of it is the authentic expression of our being. And that's going to look different for every person because we are unique. But I would say there is a uniting essence to that as well. And we're not going to get into that right now. So this inability to contain one's emotions, which is to say, not shove them down, but be with them. This is not the same as, I just need to express myself. Like, I think we've all heard someone say that. I've done it myself. I'm sure maybe you have too. We'll let you talk about yourself though here. But can you see how this need part is actually alluding or illuminating this part of ourself that we're unable to accept and be with? It's really shedding light on that. This need, I needed to express it. Again, nothing wrong with that. And the need is true, actually. But that need and what it's coming out of it's an insecure place. Again, nothing wrong, but it's useful to know that and understand that, so then we can get beyond this need to do it, and we can start to do these things in a more conscious and responsive way, which is really what this whole thing I'm talking about is about. Yeah. But it's essentially, it's an inability to feel the emotion. Like there's something insecure. There's something saying I can't contain myself, which is another way of saying I can't hold myself. I can't hold myself. Maybe my mother or my father didn't hold me, or I didn't feel held in my uniqueness, in my being, or whatever the little tiny situation or big situation was that formed our relationship to this emotion. So feeling our feelings and holding them is something we really have to learn. And I mean, at least I haven't met someone that was just born with, like, who didn't earn this quality from 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 lots of deep inner work and deep acceptance that comes from allowing these emotions and feeling them, and working with them directly. So life is constantly presenting us with the opportunity to hold ourselves more and more in our experience. And it becomes our choice to open or close down and to express or suppress. And the more aware we become of these parts of ourselves that are needing to take these feelings away or turn them into something else, rather than being with them as they are, the more we can allow life to be expressed and move through us rather than getting caught up in us. So I'm going to talk about the expression, and an expression can be an access point to feeling an emotion. So actually, it can go the other way around. It's kind of this like fake it till we make it idea, I guess you could call it, where we can't access our anger or even our grief, or we can't access what's under our anger, so we start punching pillows, or we can't, we've suppressed it for so long, we need to almost force it out. We need to kind of like stoke the fire, if you will. And then once the fire's going, the fire's going. And that's when it's important to have that ability to hold and contain, and or at least if you're going to do something like that, to be in a space where you are held and contained. If you can't do that for yourself, because it could lead to, I don't know, things that might be, there's consequences. We'll just say that. Um, so I was thinking about like depression and anxiety as it relates to suppression and expression. And as I've tuned into the times in my life where I've been really depressed after breakups, or really anxious during relationships, or after the relationship ended, or whatever it was, certain situations that I didn't want to go or I didn't want to do, whatever it was, it's interesting to reflect upon, because when I think of depression, um, I think of suppression. I think that's kind of obvious. And depression, I find, is usually accompanied by this quality of heaviness, because we're carrying around a bunch of stuff. We're shoving it down. We're getting heavy. We're just holding more and more and more weight. We're not processing it, whether that's by choice or not. Well, I guess we're talking about choice here. But I think, if you have suppressed emotions, I'd say everyone has repressed emotions. And I think that's an entirely different topic, which is why I'm not getting into it. But that would only add to the weight, is the point. Where, on the other hand, if we have anxiety, we'll usually be more talkative and expressive. I've been more towards the anxious side on a regular basis. So I have a little more to say about anxiety. But anxiety has a very airy, light quality. It's almost too light. It's almost too light, too much energy, where we're quite literally losing our ground, right? Like, this is why people who are anxious often, they can't stand still. They're always moving. They can't relax because they're like floating away. They don't know how to like just be here. They're just, anxiety is usually synonymous with worry, or it's thinking about something that's not happening, da, 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 stuck in the future. Suppression, depression, be more stuck in the past. And you can also have the paralyzing effect of too much energy, which is, I would almost equate that with a form of like dissociation. Our body's like disconnected from spirit. We've cut off because it was so much, we just left. So we're just like we're paralyzed. We can't. It's an immediate rejection, a really immediate, intense rejection, to maybe a really immediate, intense experience or feeling. And again, it's a survival mechanism, and we're trying to like learn in life through the experiences that get brought to us over and over and over again. how to transcend these things and to live in this body embodied on earth, but not so taken over by the experience. Like Jesus taught, to be in the world, but not of the world. And that's the balance between that's essentially what I'm talking about too, is we got this capacity as human beings to be extremely involved with life, which is to feel everything as it comes, to be with everything as it comes, but not to be overtaken by it, which is we start if we're overtaken by something, we're reacting, we're squirming, we're pushing it away, we're freaking out, really. And we don't always express how much we're freaking out inside. This doesn't always match. The external, internal don't always match. Hence the inauthenticity of some expression that I'm addressing here. So I already said this. This airy anxiety is very airy, right? So anxious people are not actually grounding their energy into anything, this emotional energy into anything, and they can't, because actually the very thing they need to ground it into is the experience that they're avoiding, which they need to feel the feeling to do. So that's why they're like freaking out. It's like the answer is literally to be with the thing they don't want to feel. And it's like that's super. I mean, that's essentially what depression is too. It's like, it's inability to accept, and these are trauma responses. But when you can't feel it in the anxiety case, you're just burning all their energy. You're just burning your energy up because you're unable to hold it. It's like too much energy. It's just like you don't have that capacity to hold that. You haven't developed that capacity to hold that. And so like that's why it's a survival mechanism, because if you don't leak it out, or if you don't dissociate, then you're going to collapse or you're going to explode, which could be actually probably quite literally life threatening. So like to speak a little bit more about anxiousness, is how I was thinking about it is there's this it's a resistant to the movement of the emotions, even though the movement is happening. So anxiety is like running through your emotions. It's like swimming upstream. It's like running against your emotions. So you feel like you have a lot of energy, and you do in the beginning, but since it's not grounded in anything, you're not able to hold it. You burn out much quicker than if you went with your emotions, which is really to say you float downstream, you embrace life, you go with it. You're not fighting, you're not trying to get to somewhere that's not here. And then the depressed person burns out because they refuse to move. They're holding on to a rock in the middle of the river, even though they know they must let go. I'm not laughing at depressed people, by the way. And if you are going through something like that, I very much have compassion and empathy for you, because I've been there. I'm not there right now, I guess, but within me there is still depression. Depression is ever present, as well as every other emotion. Depression and anxiety I would actually not qualify as emotions, but I'm actually going to talk about that soon. So the depressed person burns out because they refuse to move. They're holding on to a rock in the middle of the river, even though they know they must let go to get to the shore where it's actually safe. There's literally no other way than to let go of the rock, but they refuse and get weighed down by the weight of the flowing stream. And the water feels a lot heavier when you aren't moving. And it is. If you're standing, if you're walking in a river that's flowing, right, you're going with it. It's like the water, it's not it's not bubbling up, but if you stand there, it starts to push your legs. It's like that heaviness of depression. So now we're going to return back to this expressing emotions and how it's sometimes a way to avoid them. So maybe you've met someone that seemed overly expressive, almost to the point where it seemed like phony. And sometimes that's going to be due to our incorrect judgment and perception, and sometimes it's true. Ultimately, this isn't discernment class, and I'm not going to teach that or talk about that really right now. Maybe we'll talk about discernment in another video, but I'm going to say that this is ultimately up to that individual to decide for themselves if they are authentically expressing themselves or not. Really, that's for them to figure out, and not really anyone's say in pointing that out for them. Because if we do that, it doesn't even mean that they're going to admit it. This is what life is allowing for. It's allowing for us to step into authenticity by giving us experiences that challenge what we believe to be true with what is actually true, and then force us to face that truth. Um, yeah, some people are just authentically eccentric. We all know those eccentric individuals, really eccentric individuals. So why I bring this up is that it can be the case that we express a feeling or fake one to deny another one, unlike the case where we fake one to bring up a feeling. So for example, like we can express happiness when it is not actually present by smiling and putting on a show when we're really sad, which is usually done to keep the peace or to not upset the waters, because actually it's a way to avoid other uncomfortable emotions that may surface if we actually tell the truth. And really, to do that, to put on a show, is to actually abandon ourselves, which is most likely to perpetuate the very wound that even allowed for this discomfort with that emotion to begin with. Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to intensity, emotional intensity. We classify emotions as really intense or not so intense, and that seems to coincide with our capacity to feel something or not. It's too intense, it's like I can't take it. Well, like, if intensity is a part of life, why can't we take it? Why can't we hold that too? That's what I was really asking myself with this emotional eating thing. It was like, okay, like this is happening and I'm aware and I can't, this is a process. I guess I'm having a really hard time feeling this and being with it. And so I just go to the food. I just can't handle it. And the food takes my mind off it's like almost like an anxiousness, but really in there, as I've more recently discovered, it's like kind of like a resentment and hatred, which under that is like a grief sense, a grief feeling. So emotions really are only intense because of our relationships to them. That's the key, I think, is the relationship to the emotion in this. So I got this example. So this is where we may cling to our depression because it feels familiar, even though we understand depression to be a negative thing conceptually, or something we would not like to be experiencing. And maybe this happened because when we were a child, our father left our mother, and our mother became depressed, and we ended up taking on that and storing the complex mix of emotions it was. In other words, we avoided feeling to protect our mother, and then later, since we maybe had to become our mom's new support system. Hence, our mother may have become emotionally dependent on us, and yada yada. You know how the story goes. We ultimately end up taking that responsibility on to overcome the thing that was not our fault, but our responsibility, our gift, really. And that is our gift we have to offer the world. That work we do through this wound, through this trauma, when we overcome that, is such a beautiful thing. And that's something I'm going to constantly remind you of here on this channel is like this is not a place to talk about being a victim. This is a place to talk about working with and through the circumstances, the people, the situations, the emotions, the feelings that life brings us in a collaborative effort to awaken ourselves to more and more greater states of consciousness, which is really a more integrated human experience, and which gives one the capacity to be more responsive to life. And the more responsive to life you are, the more conscious you are, the more mindful you are, the more compassionate you can be, the more love you can experience, the more happiness you will have. So, in that example, strangely, what happened with this example is that even though depression is something maybe this person doesn't want to experience, it can become associated in our minds with maybe a concept of home or hominess or this feeling of home. So, like this negative emotion, this uncomfortable feeling is latched onto a positive idea or positive concept, which maybe also has a feeling tied to it. So, when and if we begin to let go of it, which is to say, allow our depression to be released and feel all the things it represented, ultimately, we may then start to feel grief, which doesn't feel like home because our mom didn't grieve because she didn't want to feel weak. And so we associate grief with weakness rather than relief. And since we really want to feel connected, even though being connected in this case, which is really just a screwed up trauma version of it, is depressing, like it's pretty fucked up stuff, honestly, and quite paradoxical. But it's true that humans are complex creatures, right? Emotions are only adding such a greater dimension, if not many dimensions, to our experience here. So this is good because, I think we should define what I mean by feeling. I think we might put emotion and feeling together as one thing. Emotion, I'm more describing as a quality, and the feeling is the relationship to it. So feeling it's what lies between us and a specific quality of an energy, that emotion being an energy. So it is our relationship. The feeling is what comes out of the relationship between who we think we are and that energy. So you could call it our relationship between mind and heart, or mind and body. And when we get these two things on the same page, the full human experience starts to really be something very different. Very different. And that is a big part of what the medicine within is all about. So, in other words, feeling is how we relate to a specific expression of energy, but it is not that energy by itself. So, it's a common practice to express an emotion, which is what I'm talking about here, to express an emotion in order to avoid feeling it or because one cannot handle the intensity of it. Like, I'm sure many of us have felt something and then said, I just had to let it out. Or like, I just had to let it out. I had to. I mean, really sit with that. Like you had to let it out. You had to let it out. Like you are, let's be clear. There's a choice here, because there in this statement is implied that we knew it was being felt before we had to let it out. So there was an option to not. This is why I alluded to this, like this assumption that if we don't let it out, we keep it in. But there's the third option, which is the being able to be, which is essentially to become that emotion, to not separate yourself from it anymore. I'll say more on that in a second. So really, there's a lack of responsibility being taken in this case of what we're saying I had to let it out. We're actually trying to like say it's not our fault. And that actually prevents us, again, it's another form of self-abandonment. It prevents us from actually feeling the emotion, and it keeps us caught in this cycle. It's kind of like a blame cycle. Anyways, you had to let it out, which it's not that you had to, like I said, but that you cannot handle it because you didn't want to feel it. That's what you really want to say, and that would be a more acceptable version of taking a response. That would be a way to take responsibility for that emotion. And the opposite could also happen where you shove it down, but in either case you don't feel it fully. So if a feeling is not grounded, then we could say the expression of it could be a way of not feeling it. All right, here we are expressing the emotion before we feel it. Where if we take that a step further and say that it wasn't even an expression of the emotion, but an expression of our thought relationship to it. So we're reacting to our relationship to that emotion and then calling it an expression, which is actually not the authentic expression of that emotion. And again, this requires oneself to really be honest with oneself and do some serious soul searching, because it's not really easy to figure that out at first. But it becomes more and more obvious with time when an expression is legit. It's legitimately from us. So again, I need to be clear that I'm not saying we shouldn't express emotions, that it's ever wrong, nor am I ever saying that suppressing them is wrong either. But there are consequences, again, of doing either, and they affect our relationship with others in ways that we actually don't want. And ultimately, they affect us in painful ways for ourselves. And it just perpetuates the suffering we're trying to free ourselves of. So what I am saying is that whether we express an emotion or not, it would be most beneficial, or more beneficial at least, if we felt it first. That is to say, if we held it, if we witnessed it, if we embodied it. And then what we will find is that we can feel the energy of an emotion without needing to do anything with or about it. In that is the choice. In that is a response, the capacity to respond. We're becoming more conscious individuals because the awareness has led to something much more profound. It's led to an opportunity to evolve and to help others evolve and to relieve suffering from not only ourselves, which is really no different than to help others relieve their own suffering by doing your own inner work, but to also directly help others relieve suffering, because we can allow others to be themselves too, which is the path, the truest path to healing, which is that medicine within. It's that authentic expression that is a step towards maybe what might just be an ideal now, but maybe and also just an idea, but it is ultimately freedom. Again, so many video topics here. So what we'll find is that if we can feel the energy of an emotion without needing to do anything with or about it, that we no longer may even wish to express it. In fact, we definitely will if we wait long enough, because like thoughts, emotions are always, well, in motion. Emotion, right? Or we may feel the expression is what is needed in that moment. And how to know this, I will speak on in the future, maybe the next video actually. And the point is, we feel it first and then we act out of that, or better yet, we wait for action to happen or to come through us, which is a very different thing than reacting, because the reacting is more coming from the mind, which is actually that relationship, the component, the other side of that relationship to that feeling, which is using memory and imagination in the experience that is actually dirting up what that reality really is, which is to say, you're not seeing things as they are. Um, but the feeling is allowing an access into the present. The issue is that we're often not able to access that feeling in its purity because of this mental conflict, this mind-body conflict. So you could say feeling without expression is the quality of holding space. And we're going to get into that a little bit, holding space. So to feel an emotion in its entirety is to really say that we became it. And in order to do that, we have to be able to hold ourselves. Otherwise, we risk draining our energy through shoving it down or spilling it out and potentially on others, which is what we're talking about here, aren't we? So the greater the capacity one has to feel more intensity. Pay attention to this. The greater the capacity one has to feel more intensity without the need to express is representative of this becoming a more conscious process. And really, what it shows is that that individual's capacity to hold space, which is not only for themselves, but ultimately for others as well. Usually we'll find people with anxiety, like going back to this anxiety thing, they have a hard time finding their center, like their ground. They can't hold themselves. This is what my life struggle has been. Like I haven't been able to hold myself, and I'm learning to do that. And what's beautiful about the potential of an anxious person is they already are super sensitive to life. And their issue is that they don't know how to handle that sensitivity. But in that is something so beautiful, is because once you learn and you cultivate that other quality of emptiness, of void, of space, of awareness, and you can hold your own intensity that you're experiencing, then your life becomes so rich because you're no longer overwhelmed by your emotions. You can be with these feelings without them having to just totally burn you out and just overtake you in this really overwhelming way. And someone who struggles more often with like depressed qualities, more lethargy, they are too identified or too caught in this kind of spaciousness, this kind of dissociation actually, and they need to ramp up the sensitivity to like they need life, they need life force, they need to feel, right? So like people who are depressed are solid. They don't feel the movement of energy at all. That's what it means to be depressed. You're like it's gone. So you're like cut off from life. And they're holding but they're holding nothing. They have nothing to hold. Whereas an anxious person has too much to hold. So one thing to note on expressing emotions is that we often fall victim to the assumption that not expressing my emotions means I am suppressing them. I want to bring this back up because this is where we fall into a trap of excusing our inability to hold our emotions, and so we express them. It's interesting. I'm realizing I'm saying you're expressing them, but which I already addressed this, but really you're not expressing the emotion. You're expressing again your relationship to it, which is not actually how you feel towards not actually feeling the emotion, but how you feel about the emotion, which is the relationship, which is based in memory and imagination, which are qualities of depression and anxiety. They're not present, they're not grounded, they're not centered in what is now, which is why they're so painful, because we want to be here. So overexpression, so we're going to get into integration a little bit. Overexpression is not the same thing as integration. And it's a bit of, I want to say, mistake to think, oh, I've been expressing this emotion over and over, like I've integrated, like I understand it, when you might actually have just been avoiding the emotion the whole time, avoiding feeling it. So, like, when I say integration, I mean the emotion is truly being felt, which again, not necessarily expressed. Actually, expression does not ever need to happen for the emotion to be felt. It can happen, doesn't need to be happen. You can maybe see the difference there. If you think of integration, the emotion has been allowed inside. It's become a part of you. In fact, you have become it. So just because we're expressing an emotion, we can not automatically equate that with feeling it. And usually what is happening with this, like, I needed to express myself thing, which we talked about, is usually a reactionary process to the emotion, which is not the expression we think we are talking about here. We're thinking we're authentically expressing the emotion. I'm trying to say what I just said in a little different way because I think it can be a little difficult to understand. In fact, it was for me. And yeah, the understanding is there, but the language is a little tricky, I find. So it's not the expression we think we're talking about. So what I mean by that is we may express an emotion many times, right? Like I said, but never actually be integrating the experience that we're relating to it, often unconsciously. So that's the issue. We get a little bit into repression, I guess, but that unconsciousness. So we may never actually be integrating the experience that we are relating to it that caused the feeling, which is to allow life to happen the way it is, which is to accept our experience, which is to become one with our feeling, which is to really which is really the point of the emotion to begin with, to unite us with life. It's that juice. It's what that depressed person is missing, right? It's the juice of life. It's the it's the joy, it's the happiness, it's the pain, it's the grief, it's the anger, even the negative emotions, the ones we quotations negative. Like when you're depressed, you want to feel something. You don't care what you feel. If you've ever been depressed, you'll know what I mean. Like that's where it gets dark when we like pain becomes pleasurable because we can't feel shit and we just want to like fucking cut our wrists. You know? Like that's the level people go to because they're so cut off from life, they're so disconnected. And it's extremely painful. So this whole thing, this emotion thing, it just adds such a dimension to our experience that allows for, I think it's really what allows for consciousness to evolve, this mixing of mind and body, this mixing of emotion and mind, this yin and yang. And like this is all that medicine. It's our relationship to others, it's our relationship to ourselves, and really those are often just, you know, making sure my mic's on, mirrors to us, mirrors for us to show us where we are disconnected within ourselves. So the outer medicine and the inner medicine, you could say, are really the same thing. So let's get a little more into like holding space. So the greater the capacity one has for feeling without the need to express or suppress, which is to allow, which is to be. The quality of being is the quality of holding space. That is representative of one's capacity to hold space for oneself and another. If we can't feel what another is feeling, what we are really doing under the surface at a subtle level is rejecting them. Subtle, unconscious, obviously consciously we might not be like, you know, F you to our friend who just broke up with his, or just got dumped by his girlfriend and they just need like a homie to hold him at and just hang out with them or listen to him. But if that homie has trouble feeling their stuff because they've never felt it, then that person actually might ultimately end up feeling rejected too, and kind of another tangent I'm not going to go into, but that ultimately becomes the work for both of those individuals, the individual work for each of them. So rejection can happen from this rejection I'm talking about at the subtle level. It can happen from aversion or clinging. And in either of those reactions, not responses, aversion and clinging are reactionary unconscious processes. But in those, there's a lack of presence. That's the key. So we have to be able to hold space for ourselves and our emotions to truly allow others to feel what they need to feel. Because what we provide another human being by doing this, by being present with them, is a space of non-judgmental awareness. Because awareness is, in essence, non-judgmental as it stands, in which they can feel their experience in its totality, which is what not doing resulted in them being wounded in the first place, and which made this feeling so uncomfortable. So let me just say that again without the fluff. We have to be able to hold space for ourselves and our emotion to truly allow others to feel what they need to feel. What we provide another human being by doing this, by being present with them, is a space of non-judgmental awareness in which they can feel their experience in its totality, which is what not doing resulted in then being wounded in the first place and made this feeling so uncomfortable. It's what not doing in the first place resulted in them being wounded. It's really what I want to say, and that's what made this feeling so uncomfortable. So I keep talking about feeling being a relationship to an emotion because, first of all, we have societies in different cultures, more general judgments of emotions and relationships. Then we have our, like society as a whole usually views anger as like a negative thing, or grief as like a sign of weakness. I think that's maybe not a global thing, but that is definitely a big portion of the globe, at least in the Western world for sure. And I think that's changing, but that is, I think, a fair thing to state. Then we have our family's relationships to those emotions, which usually end up becoming ours until we start to grow up, and all those cultural, societal, familial relationships to emotions start to merge together and fit together in such a way that begin to alter our own relationship and form it to different emotions through ultimately having new experiences as we go through life. And this all has to mainly do with whether we categorize these emotions are good or bad. So that's what I mean by judging them. Or also you could say whether they feel comfortable or uncomfortable, which is a result of our relationship to those emotions. So, like, for example, how I experience anger and sadness, I guarantee you, is not how you do. I'll give you an example in just a second. The quality of that emotion may be the same, but the experience is different in the sense that it meets me differently than it meets you or someone else. This could be physically or psychologically. Excuse me. Someone might feel anger in their tummy, and I may feel it in my heart. Someone may find it really relieving to express anger, and I may shove it all down and feel shame around it. In other words, emotions are multidimensional, and they allow for a multidimensional experience. They're very complex in themselves. And when you start to add in all this other stuff of life, especially the ideas and concepts of mind, it really complicates this, doesn't it? But like I said, like this is all aiding the evolution of our consciousness individually and as a collective. You could say as consciousness itself. And we must honor this process and work with this process, or we fall victim to shame and guilt traps, which perpetuate these cycles we're trying to be free of in the first place. To close ourselves off to emotions, I'm just going to read this to you directly. I've pretty much been doing that the whole time. To close ourselves off to emotions is to contradict life and really ourselves. This is painful because we place distance between us and life, and we perpetuate the discomfortable relationship we have with emotions. We can embrace anger, we can embrace sadness, we can embrace happiness, even hatred, and even jealousy. Now, I'm not saying we need to act on them. I'm not saying we need to act on them. And here is a great example. You could see where expression may be a terrible idea. And for example, with hatred, like think of all the things people who want to express hatred have done and might do. Or resentment. Like this is where we bottle things up and we start to resent, and we just people kill their spouses, shoot up schools, like just terrible things happen. And that's why it's very important to be mindful of a feeling and then to follow it back to its origin, which is our relationship. And then through doing that, that's the work, getting to the source, which is exploring and understanding and accepting that relationship to that original feeling. And in that, we integrate that feeling, which is to say we become it, we be it, we embrace it. So this is why it's important to learn how to hold our emotions. Again, not suppress, but hold, so we can feel it and use that feeling appropriately. The feeling is not the only information in the moment that is directing an action. The feeling is not the only information in the moment that is directing an action. I'm speaking to expression again. It's just that we get so caught up in peripherally blinded, we're so focused on the emotion and avoiding the emotion. Oftentimes, that's the case, that we're peripherally blinded in the waves of intense emotion, and we forget about all the other information around us, the people, the places, the things, the relationship, and therefore we act without total clarity, which is to say we react. When we can be with our emotions, then our actions are in collaboration with life rather than in competition with it or against it. So what we're really talking about is when we work with our emotions, when we feel our emotions, like we're trying to control our experience, which is a way, like that's competing with life. We're competing with life. We want to resist life. We don't want to play the game. When you collaborate, you choose to play the game. You choose to be a participant in life rather than a victim or a martyr. So a lot of people are stuck in. So feeling an emotion is really to say we became the emotion. We only experience the emotion as intense or bad or uncomfortable or this or that when we relate to it, which is just to say we keep it away from us. We keep it separate from us. Relationship, there's two entities here. So when we accept the feeling, we allow it to be, meaning we no longer identify with it. So that spaciousness quality, it starts to come up, which allows for us to be it through an embrace. And then if the expression happens through us, it happens. So we don't actually have to try to express. We don't have to need to express. We don't have to want. We don't have to put any effort. Expression is effortless. Life is effortlessly expressing all the time. And whether expression happens, it makes no difference to us. We're not phased whether the expression occurred or it did not. This is the issue we run into with the needing to express, is that if we don't express it, then something bad's going to happen. But we're not actually thinking clearly because we're not considering the fact that expressing that could also result in something bad happen, which is the case from some, like classic example, someone who's anxious and then they do something and then they get anxious about their decision and then they're anxious that they're anxious and they're anxious and it's just stuck in this cycle. It's just perpetuating the cycle. And that's what a lot of us are doing all the time. We're in all these cycles that are just running like mechanically. And yeah, life is allowing us these opportunities at every moment to break free of these cycles, to not be stuck in compulsiveness, to have a choice. So, and it's this needing thing, this needing to express, that we are not feeling it. We are really just feeling our discomfort or insecurity as it relates to that emotion, actually acting that out. As I said before, we're expressing that relationship, the insecurity, not the emotion. In other words, we are still trying to examine it with the mind, which is how we separate ourselves from it, which is actually a way of avoiding feeling it. It's a very tricky egoic way of thinking we're feeling it when we're not. Because you can't think you're feeling it. You can feel it or you can think. Or you can think and feel, but usually the thinking is a way to avoid the feeling, more often than not, too. So this separation that the mind does, that happens, it's all based on memory and imagination, past and present, which is void of the present and it's out of touch with life. So when we merge with the experience in feeling, when we have an understanding, so that's the integration, right? That's the integration. Understanding comes from merging with the experience and feeling. The understanding comes from direct experience. We can read something in a book, right? And then we can go put it into action. And then we can really find out for ourselves if it's true. Otherwise, it's just an idea that we're just playing with an idea, which serves a great purpose, and it can be, if used correctly, very evolutionary in itself. So the mind fears the emotions, because in merging with the feeling, it ceases to exist. But it only fears this because of the relationship it has created to that feeling through a resistance to past experiences, an inability to accept through either the over unauthentic expression or the suppression of the thing, of the emotion. And there's an interesting paradox here, because like you'll find if you meditate, for example, the mind actually finds enjoyment in this surrender and this letting go. And when it finally does let go, because the mind gets filled with being, and the mind gets filled with being, which is its source. The source of being, the source that is being, has allowed for mind to be. And then the mind, when it's filled with this quality of being, when it gives structure to being, which gives rise to ego and da-da-da-da, talk about that later, the mind begins to serve its true purpose as a witness to life, rather than this. Really, it's the whole don't let the mind be your master thing, which is what kind of the human problem is. Our overarching human issue is. We're going to wrap it up a little bit here. So we got holding space, right? So to hold space, again, it's to have this capacity to regulate one's quality of expansiveness. It is to meet the edge or edges of an energy. In this case, we're talking about emotion, at its utmost intensity, without needing to suffocate or abandon it. To do this, one needs to be able to feel what is present without reacting to it. Reacting being any form of pushing it away or pulling it towards aversion or clinging. That's Buddha's whole thing. Pushing it away or pulling it towards us, which is to try to control our emotions and therefore not accept our experience, which is to say we're denying reality as it is, which is to cause suffering. I once heard Ram Dass. If you ever heard of Ram Dass, I'll be talking about him a lot. He once said, pain is just strong stimulus. Suffering occurs because we're resisting the pain. And that's I'll let you sit with that one on your own. It's kind of hard to accept in some ways, to feel that. So there may be a tendency here to think holding means displaying, like in the term holding space, it means displaying some form of control, like you're holding it, like you're not letting go. Yet, that's not the quality of holding I'm talking about, which is why I defined it as the capacity to regulate one's quality of expansiveness. So it's far from that. It's far from that control. Here's space. So here, space is not void. Sorry, wrong tone. I'm going to read this. Here, space is not void of movement, and that energy or movement which is being held is no different from the stable quality that naturally arises in an adaptable space. It is the lack of solidity of one that supports the other. And it is the solidity of one that allows for the other to move, and vice versa. The black and the white and the black. You ever see the yin-yang symbol? And then they're both meeting each other halfway in balance. Really just describing that symbol, actually. So if we can meet our polarities at the edges and hold them in their intensity by allowing them to be, that is to feel, then we have real intimacy. So in this intimacy, which we're calling feeling life, being with life, being present, being with another being, merging with them, having compassion, being in love, all these things are intimacy. Intimacy is not just some sexual thing, and oftentimes sexuality is the form of expressing a lack of intimacy or avoidance of intimacy. Avoidance of intimacy on a deeper level. It is still a form of intimacy. But in this intimacy is the true feeling of emotion that is without judgment and memory. So one more thing here. Emotion is what allows experiencing to be. Life is being expressed, and we are constantly responding or reacting to it when we feel it. What we feel is actually the expression of life itself in relation to us. Life emotes, and we feel it. Feeling is what bonds us to life and gives us opportunity to unite with it and ultimately to become life, because that is what we are. So that was a long first video, and I'm really stoked to be sharing my insights here in life and my experiences of life, and I look forward to continuing this journey and probably maybe bettering my, you know what, I was gonna say bettering my video skills and all, but this is good. Like, I'm stoked with this video, so if people can get down with it, like, sweet. But to sign out, I'm just gonna do a quick little chant. You can join me if you'd like. If you're not in a car or whatever you're doing, you can just say it in your mind if you'd like. But thank you for watching this video. God bless all those who are suffering. And God forgive all of those who we have hurt, whether that was consciously or not. And please, Lord, be it thine will, not mine. May I allow life to be. And may I be present with it always and forever. And may I be forgiving when I am not. May I honor where I am, not cling to where I am going. May I not be hopeful or fearful, but forever be in love, always connected to you, always seeing you, and always acting from the place with which you speak, from the place with which you are within. Amen. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Thank you, and God bless you all. Thanks for watching.